We're now live.
Thank you. So the meeting's called to order at 10:05. So adoption of the minutes. Is there any questions or concerns, additions?
Acrobat. No. No.
Oh.
I'm okay.
Brad disappeared.
So he did.
Yeah, we may have lost Brad. We'll just wait a second to give him a minute to reconnect.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. I'll come back. Is there any questions or anything on adoption of the minutes? Seeing none, can I have a motion? Yes.
I'll move.
The seconder, Tony?
Yep.
All in favor? Okay, carried. So we'll move to approval of the agenda with the circulated addendum. Did everybody get that addendum?
Yep, the report.
Okay. So a mover for that. Henry and Tony, all in favor? Carried. It moves us to disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Is there any? Seeing none. Okay. Matters for consideration. Access and inclusion framework. Staff report on access and inclusion framework update, and it's Pam. Go ahead, Pam.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just providing an update from the last meeting. We did have a question from the councillor regarding the 11 additional spaces that Palace had asked for above our notional targets. So first, I just wanted to highlight that although in our first memo it said 432 spaces, just due to a rounding error, it's actually 433. So not a big deal, but it is one more space. But the ministry has requested that we remove the 11 spaces initially, and for us to confirm that we would accept our notional targets at this time. And so we have done that. So we have removed the 11. However, in those conversations, they also provided greater clarity around the 2022 targets, which were 56 spaces. We originally were under the understanding that those were spaces already created because the target we received near the end of 2022. But in fact, we were to confirm if we how many spaces we actually did create from September to December. So in our catchment area, we only had one new program, which was in Prince Edward County, which was the Suffice for Before and After School program with 26 spaces. So out of the 56, we only created 26. So we actually had 30 additional spaces to shift in future years. So originally I'd reported that we had 225 new spaces to create. So we actually now have 255. So we have an additional 30, which is good news because we do know that there's lots of demand for those spaces. So out of those 255 spaces, 81 spaces have been identified for Prince Edward and 174 spaces for Lennox and Addington. So Lennox and Addington spaces did not change from the last report, but we increased the Prince Edward number of spaces. And I guess just to add to the report, I know that likely some of you may be receiving calls from parents. I know we certainly are, that we know that the demand is going to far exceed the number of spaces that we've been given from our notional allocation, because as fees are lowering, the increase is increasing. And so we know that these spaces aren't going to meet the full demand. So there will unfortunately continue to be wait lists and families who aren't able to access the spaces. However, it does not prevent folks from expanding beyond these spaces. They just may not have access to some of the dollars that we have available to us for CWAP to make things more affordable for families. It would be at market rate. So it doesn't prohibit folks from continuing to expand, but these notional targets are the spaces that we're going to receive funding from the province for to help support those spaces. And then the other kind of thing to highlight is that it's, when I've mentioned this before, is the workforce. That expanding, you know, we have a workforce crisis, so trying to find enough workforce qualified staff to work in these new spaces. And in some cases, we currently may have capacity in our existing licensed spaces, but they're not running at full capacity because of the shortage of the workforce. However, I did reach out prior to the meeting just to get a sense, and that's actually a very low number in our area, so that's good news. It's really around the expansion for us. So happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Is there any questions for Pam? Seeing none, could I ask one, please? I'm just wondering, and you mentioned a couple points, Pam, but so it's 81 new spaces that's coming to Prince Edward County, right? Out of the 225, but that's over a 4-year period.
Correct.
So I'm just wondering,
20 a year.
so, and then you mentioned that the daycares or childcare could expand, but these are just ones that are getting the funding for it. So someplace like the hub, could they expand if the people or if the parents are willing to pay? I guess without getting the funding for it.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. So folks could expand and charge the market rate outside of the CWAP system, and that nothing prohibits them from doing that. But folks, the additional spaces that we're looking to create would receive additional funding to support that affordability and fee reduction for parents. But I should mention that although we have 4 years, it doesn't mean like we could do all 81 next year if that was the desire and there was a need. So it doesn't have to be spread out. We just have 4 years to create those spaces. And the other point I forgot to mention is that the province did reserve 8,000 spaces so that there is an opportunity as we move along to identify additional needs. So I don't know what that process looks like because it hasn't been identified yet, but there's potentially an opportunity for us to express a desire for additional spaces as we move along.
Thank you. So I just got a quick follow-up. So how does that work if we want to move all 80 spaces into like this year? And are we able to do that? Like, do we have enough staff, and do we know how many staff for childcare givers are out there right now?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we certainly could do all, like we would have to, I think we do need a little bit more engagement with the communities because we have to find out if there is an operator willing to expand and what their capacity is for existing staff. So those are the questions we would need to know. And is there community space currently available? Because there is no capital to build or to buy land or build new. So it would have to be an existing space that we could retrofit. And there is some dollars attached to it from the province, and not a lot. It's about 350,000 maximum for 50 spaces, which we don't believe will be enough to fully retrofit a center. So there will be some more work and engagement that needs to take place. And certainly my next steps will be to meet with each of the lower tiers to talk about that, to see what's available and how we can support this moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? Steve?
Just a comment. Thanks for this, Pam. I mean, we've obviously got a crisis, so anything we can do to speed this up and understand the options that we could exercise, whether it's finding a private operator or physical expansion of a space would be really, really helpful. And of those additional spaces you were referring to, the several thousand, will you keep us up to date about how that is going to be moving forward with the province so we can jump on it as and when necessary?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. So as soon as we receive notification of what that process looks like, we will be reaching out to say, how many more spaces would we like to commit to or to try to achieve and ensure that we apply for those.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. No, my question's been answered.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder for this? Steve and John. All in favor? Carried. Moves us to the number 2, special needs resourcing. So the staff report, special needs resourcing, and it's Pam again. Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Chair. So this really is just an information to let you know that we are working on the ministry as part of that inclusion and access framework. We want to ensure that our childcare operators have the supports they need to ensure that children with special needs have equitable access to childcare and get the supports they need. So nothing's really changed with the guidelines as far as what we've always been doing, but they have provided a bit more clarity on some things that are in scope versus out of scope. So we will be meeting with our providers just to review that, just to see where we're at in our community, and then ensuring that we're sharing that. So at this time, we haven't started that review, so we're just starting that now, but it was more information to let you know that the review will be taking place. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there any questions?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Brad. Yep. Pam, do you have a sort of an idea? Like, is there sort of unmet demand or needs out there with people with special needs, like children? Like, I'm not. Do you have any stats on it or gut instinct that things are not being met and there's demand there?
Thank you, through the chair. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of stats on, how many children in our community have special needs, or, and who may not be getting access unless we do a survey. So we don't have a lot, but I do know that for those who do attend childcare, we do have great agencies that are working to ensure that they are connected to the resources in our community and are getting the supports they need.
Right. Thanks, Pam.
Yeah.
John, you had a question?
It was Tony's question that I was going to ask. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I have one, if I could. So with this, will we be hiring extra or additional staff to focus on this area?
Good question to you. That's not our intent at this time. It's really just to meet with our agencies to ensure that we're providing the in-scope services with that clarification. It's really just to ensure that the funding is being used with the intent that it was meant for, but we don't anticipate needing to hire additional staff. Now, in saying that, like the childcare centers can apply for what we call enhanced support funding to support additional staff in their programs if needed to support children with special needs. So we're certainly always open to, if that's a need, to funding that, but it's funding that goes to the childcare providers. So it's not an actual dedicated full-time staff.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? Okay, did I have a mover and a seconder for this report? Henry? Sam? All in favor? That's carried. Moves us to number 3, early years and childcare funding. Staff report, early years childcare funding review, and Kent is here. Is Kent here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my name is Liam, and I'm a business analyst here at Palace, and unfortunately,
Okay.
Kent was unable to be here today, so I'll be presenting on his behalf.
Okay, go ahead.
So in the previous PALS committee on February 9th, there was a request to review the total ratio of early years and childcare funding received by Prince Edward and Lennox and Addington County. So overall, this report summarizes the cumulative amounts of funding each county has received since 2019, presented in both the dollar and percentage value. Overall, if there's any questions related to this report, I would be happy to try my best to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions? Just a quick one. Just in 2020, we had 42%, and we're down to 36 again for Prince Edward County. And in those 2 years, it's 57 and 63. Why is the adjustment?
Perhaps Pam would be able to speak to this a little bit more. As I was not here during those times within 2020, so Pam, maybe you would be able to speak to that a little more.
Sure, thank you to you, Chair. In 2020, because of COVID, there was a lot of additional funding that was available, and so each community, depending on their needs and for different things, that kind of skewed those numbers a little bit. So like we funded things like child absences. So if a child was absent because they had to screen out due to COVID symptoms, we helped to cover those costs for parents. So potentially there could have been more children's absences in Prince Edward County versus LNA in those years. So there was just different variables in those years. And I guess the other thing I would highlight is that we don't necessarily like dedicate funding to each municipality, because a lot of the funding is based on actual needs. So for fee subsidy, for example, it depends who comes and applies for fee subsidy. So it's not a set ratio. Our like general operating funding that we use to support wages and operating costs is based on the number of licensed spaces in a community. So a lot of it is really fixed based on funding formulas. So it's not so much that we dedicate a percentage of our total budget to each area, because it really is based on need. Special purpose funding, for example, is based on applications to us. So it depends what each provider submits for applications to support their repairs and maintenance and play-based equipment, things like that. So just to highlight that it's not a lot of it is just depending on the need that comes to us each year, but it does seem to be fairly even over the years when the business analyst did the analysis of that.
Okay, thank you. No other questions? Mover and a seconder for this. John and Sam, all in favor? And that carries. Moves us to number 4, the Tamworth Affordable Housing Update. And this is from Lynn.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I have a quick presentation, so I will just share my screen. Is everyone able to see that presentation there? Okay, perfect. So I just have screenshots here to show you about the Tamworth Affordable Housing Project. So we have received our certificate of completion on that project. So we took some photos and went out, and here they are for you. So this is the 2 buildings looking towards the east at both buildings. And this is from the road facing south, I guess it would be southwest actually, at the one building on the right. And the next photo is from the same position, looking at the building on the left, which would be to the southeast. This is a photo from the living room, looking into the barrier-free kitchen. So you can see that there is a space under the kitchen counter for people with wheelchairs and those kinds of things. So they're very user-friendly and barrier-free for those that need those. This is looking in from the doorway into the kitchen. So you probably noticed in some of the other photos as well that there's lots of light. The units are bright, lots of natural light coming in. So they're very, very, they're lovely. Basically, they're nice and bright and uplifting. I think people will really enjoy them. This shot is looking in from the living room in past the kitchen. So you'll see the door to the right. That leads to the bedroom. You can see the wall oven just past that. Again, for barrier-free purposes so that people can access the oven. And then the next doorway is the bathroom on the right. And then you'll see that that's the entryway, but there's also a laundry space there for a washer and dryer. And the next shot again is from the entryway looking into the kitchen and into the living room. And again, there's a patio attached to each of the units and there's a door leading out to them. And those doors are also intended to be as barrier free as possible so that people can get in and out through those doors as well. So at the last Palace committee, there was a report brought and was approved in terms of how to allocate those units. So staff have been working on showing the units to potential tenants and getting confirmation as to whether or not they would like to move into them. I believe 7 out of 8 have agreed that they would like to move into those units. And at this time, I'd just like to thank Palace Committee, Lennox and Addington County, Stone Mills Township, the contractor. Everything went very, very smoothly on this build. We were able to meet all of the timelines, but from the province, and we have 8 units, 2 of which are RGI and 6 which are affordable. And we have 4 barrier-free units between the 2 buildings, which is exceptional and in great demand in this area for sure. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Thanks, Lynn. They look good. Is there any questions? Sam?
Sorry. I just want to say this is fantastic. I mean, I'm new to this committee and I feel like there's some returning members, so it's really neat to see, and the barrier free is so incredibly great. I would love to see this more happening in our area. It's just, and you're right, they're bright, happy, the colors, the natural wood tones, like everything was very thoughtfully done. Just thank you for doing this project.
Thank you.
Steve, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I do. Just a couple of quick questions. What's the square footage of the units?
Don't quote me, but I believe they're about 760 square feet per unit. And that was in order to accommodate the barrier free. Scott can confirm that though.
Yes, Lynn, hi, Scott Robertson, through you, Mr. Chair, to the rest of the committee. Very accurate. They're 750 square feet. So same thing, yeah.
And what's the heat source?
It's electric, actually, electric baseboard.
That's what I was looking at.
Yeah, they're super energy efficient. There's actually R80 in the ceiling and I think R40 in the walls.
Okay.
And just for interest's sake, for the nature of the units, they're kind of, if you look at the floor plan, they're crossed. So each unit only needs to heat 2 exterior walls and the other 2 are shared.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Tony?
Yes, yeah, thanks, Brad. Yeah, I just want to say this. They look really, really nice. And it's obvious that durability, that type of thing in the exterior and interior was something that was factored into it through that design phase. So look great.
John?
Yes, just a comment. I think, and Lynn can confirm this, that this is the first new social housing or affordable housing that has been built, certainly in Lennox and Addington County, and I'm not sure about Prince Edward, since the 90s. And while it's wonderful, it's 8 units, and we know what the demand is. And the original budget, based on the grant availability, I think was a couple of million. Again, Lynn, just correct me if I'm not accurate. And in the time since the tenders were issued and until we got feedback, the budget had increased by 50% just because of the tremendous increase in materials and labor costs. So while this is wonderful, and I'm not in any way trying to downplay the achievement. It is an expensive undertaking. And if we're going to do any of this on more than a small scale, we are definitely going to need help from both the federal and provincial government, because we dipped into $1 million of reserves, and that's all local taxpayer money to help fund this. And that's great. That's why we have reserves, but we certainly can't repeat this at any scale or with any frequency without a good national and provincial policy that provides ongoing funding for this type of initiative. So I'm not trying to dump cold water in anything. It's just that's the fiscal context, right? Thank you.
Thank you. So if I can follow up on John's comments, and he makes a good point about getting help from the upper levels of government. They seem to be handing out money for where they want to build these houses. So are we contacting them to try and get some of this money? I think the federal government just laid out a bunch of $4 billion or something for housing construction. Did they not? Are we trying to get some of that money?
So the recent announcement on the 4 billion is for the Housing Accelerator Fund, and there is there's a urban stream, and then there's a small northern indigenous stream. So some of the townships would qualify for the small rural indigenous stream, and the rest of the county and Prince Edward County would qualify under the urban stream of funding. The problem is we need to have shovel ready projects. So we will be working on, over the next year or so, identifying properties that could suit, looking at what's needed in order to get them shovel ready, so that we would be able to take advantage of some of the funding opportunities. So a lot of the we've looked at the accelerator funds, small rural indigenous northern stream, and there's a lot more to it than just building housing. There's a bunch of stuff that they're involving planning and development type processes involved in it. So it's really quite complex, but we will take advantage of every funding opportunity that we possibly can. And hopefully we will be able to do something like this or something bigger in the future.
So just a quick follow-up. Do we not have land inventory now that we know we have? The reason I ask that is because, I think I heard you say we need to look to see what land is available, but I thought last term we had some land inventory. We knew which land we had in both counties.
So Pellis doesn't own any land in Prince Edward County, so we don't have a land inventory of Prince Edward County lands that may be available for affordable housing builds. So we don't have access to that. That would probably be the Affordable Housing Corporation through PEC. We have looked at lands that Pellis owns and LNA owns, because we have access to that information. And we're going through that process right now, is to see, okay, what can we add on to of our existing lands or what's potentially out there. And then this most recent build in Tamworth, it was a partnership with Stone Mills Township.
One more, this is my last question. So have we been in touch, have we been in touch with Housing Corporation to see the land inventory that Prince Edward County has? I guess this is kind of what I'm just kind of looking at, is can we fast track it?
Pellis and the Housing Corporation haven't had conversations about what joint ventures we could move forward on. We did have the Wildscapes project that we worked together on, but beyond that, we haven't gone much further than that. So generally, historically, Pellis has been responsible for rent geared to income, which is not affordable housing. Affordable housing is a separate component. It's still on the housing continuum, but it's different than rent geared to income. So that's historically what we've been focused on. The reason that this most recent build in Tamworth had affordable housing in it is because of the funding pots that came with it. So we had a small amount that we could use for rent geared to income. We had another pot that we could use for affordable. We had another pot that came from the housing reserves. So that it was all just able to be worked together. And that's what we kind of landed with. But Pellis is very open to working with the Affordable Housing Corporation in PEC to work on, joint submissions to the province for funding.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? Can I have a mover and a seconder? Tony and John. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Moves us to number 5. And it's a staff report, Pellis committee meeting format, and Lynn is doing this one again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this letter is just requesting a letter of support for 2 projects, both of them involving Wildscape. So Pellis had identified property, and the Affordable Housing Corporation for Prince Edward had also identified property. Wildscape selected the property in Prince Edward County, and they're moving forward with that piece. Pellis was not able to move forward with the piece that we had identified. However, there is another community partner that has been able to be in connection with Wildscape, and they are pursuing a partnership. So we're looking for a letter of support from Pellis Committee for that project as well. And that would be with Wildscape, as well as Lennox and Addington Association for Community Living and Interval House. So they're looking at a 3-way partnership there to potentially pursue that opportunity. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that committee may have. Beyond that, I don't have anything to add.
Is there any questions?
No.
John?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Lynn, can you expand a little bit on the proposal with Interval House and the Community Living Group in Napanee, what they're thinking of there? It's an interesting partnership there.
It is, for sure. I don't know a lot of details, but I can share my screen to show you the parcel that they are looking at. So
Lynn, I can actually jump in here to give
great
context. I've been having conversations with Sue Weir at Interval House about not only what they do for women in crisis, but also their youth transition property. So they have it's a residential space above commercial on Dundas Street in Napanee for youth transition, where the youth can stay for 18 months. And the conversation became what happens after that, and her desire to have more permanent transitional housing for youth or for the folks in Interval House. And as well pointed out that Barb Fabius, who's the executive director at Community Living, had previously had aspirations to build at the back of their property. Now this property borders on Quinte Detention, so it does need to be rezoned. That may or may not be a hurdle for in terms of the town. But her desire was to have housing for some of her community living clients that actually work on that property. So it would be kind of a live-work situation, which would be ideal because transportation can be difficult for some of those clients that live in rural areas. So the goal, and again, this depends on whether Wildscapes is successful with CMHC and how many units they would desire to build there. But I think the hope is to see 6 to 8 units, half of which would be Interval House or youth transition, and half would be community living, so that they could share that property and it's exciting for them. At least, from our perspective, when the original property that was being pitched beside the hospital in Napanee wasn't a go, that at least we could have an opportunity to maybe have something in Lennox and Addington County. But it still needs to be rezoned, and that may be a challenge for them.
You good with that, John?
Yes, thank you very much, Brenda. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Sam?
Was this the idea with why Lennox and Addington went this route? Was it for the community living partnership? Is that kind of why the motion didn't work originally for the first proposed space, or is this?
No, this is a plan, this was Plan B. Because the submission has to be made by Wildscapes to CMHC by the 13th of April, so next week, we're down to the wire. And the property that they selected that worked for their purpose, because CMHC was looking for, I'll say, difficult or unique places where they could build to have a showcase project where they could show people, see, you can put, you know, these kinds of structures in different places. And the parcel that was selected is an odd shaped piece right beside the Napanee Hospital. And we already have an existing multi-story building that Pellis owns and operating there. So it was using a piece of that land. But there were concerns from our two council members that are from Napanee, and they didn't favor that spot. They didn't think it was a good choice. So they didn't support that, and that's absolutely their right to do that. So coming down to the wire with just because this was just the past week. So coming down to the wire of the last 2 weeks, what are we going to do? Knowing that community living and interval house were interested in doing a project, it was a quick pivot just to try to, any affordable housing in the community is good affordable housing, regardless of who owns it, regardless of who's operating it. It's all good. So it was a quick pivot.
Yep. Go
I
ahead,
think
Sam.
just a follow-up comment. I think that's a really smart pivot. As Councillor Wise made out, this housing projects, these are not free. Inflation has done wonders to our communities in a very negative way. And I think it's very resourceful what was created to try and get the higher up governments to try and pay for a little bit more of our affordable housing.
Any other questions? Nope, seeing none. Can I have a mover and a seconder for this one? Henry and Tony. All in favor? And that carries. So that takes us to number 5, the Pellis, the report Pellis committee meeting format. So Lynn, that would be you again. You're on mute, Lynn.
Thank you. My apologies for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the last meeting, there was a survey communicated out following the meeting as to the future direction for the meeting format. It came back as a tie. So at this meeting, we are looking for some direction as to the preferred meeting format for Pellis committee meetings moving forward. And I'd be happy to answer the questions.
John?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I certainly understand the value of in-person meeting in terms of collegiality and sort of that human touch. It's a relatively small committee, and because it's a 2-county committee and travel for some members is considerable, I really am favoring this virtual format. I don't think we've had any trouble today exchanging ideas with one another, getting clarity on questions and so on. In addition, from an environmental standpoint, not just the time, and a travel cost standpoint, it's all good. So while I have no objection if the majority wants to meet in person, or maybe meet in person a couple of times a year, the rest of the time do virtual, but I think virtual, for the reasons I mentioned, seems to be a smart way to go at this point. That's just my view on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Tony, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Brad. Yes, certainly echo Councillor Wise's comments, and obviously from a personal perspective, for me traveling to a meeting, and I do like to see people in person. If I had a choice, I would pick in person, but when I just look at the practical side of it, and I think as John's pointing out, the environmental side of it, for me, obviously I would be traveling. It's almost a half a day on the road. Well, it's a good 3 hours or more. So, and obviously there's an expense to the county to pay mileage and the time. So I struggled with my sort of position I take, but in this case for this committee, I'm leaning towards virtual, and that's the one I had picked. And if there's a need to get together, like John, I'm fine with that. But that's my choice for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Steve?
Yeah, I agree with Tony and John. I mean, it would add, in my case, 2 hours to the meeting, traveling outside the county, and same would apply to others except for Tony and his half-day drive. So I'm fine with virtual and as necessary in-person meetings. This seems to be working out okay so far. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Henry?
Yeah, I'd like to see maybe 1 or 2 meetings a year in person, just maybe the inaugural meeting, something like that, just so we get to know each other. But I certainly, when you look at days like yesterday, I certainly wouldn't have wanted to be traveling 150 kilometers or so to meetings. So I'm fine with the virtual.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Sam, did you want to say anything or no? So I guess for me, I prefer in-person meetings, but I mean, but I'm happy with virtual meetings too. But like John and Henry, I think, 1 meeting a year or 2 meetings a year, 1 meeting a year, just in person, just so that we get to see everybody other than just their face would be good. I think just brings everybody together, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And so I'm good with the virtual meetings too.
So you want to see everybody's body, Brad?
I wasn't going to say it.
That came out wrong. Any other questions? So Lynn, how do you want to proceed?
I think Beth, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we would need a motion from committee to go virtual meetings with whatever you choose, 1 or 2 meetings per year in person. It's really up to committee.
Okay. Steve?
How about a motion that meetings be held virtually and at the call of the chair to meet in person?
Yep. You want to put that motion forward? Is there a seconder for that motion? John, is there any questions or anything on that motion? So I don't know, Beth, did you write that down, or do we need it read, or do we?
No, I think we're good, Brad.
Okay, so everybody understand the motion then?
Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Just a quick comment too is I think sort of we're all of the understanding too. If we end up having an in-person meeting scheduled, which is fine, and you end up with someone, an individual always has the option to participate, but via Zoom, I think at any location. So, whether they're not feeling well or whether for some reason travel that day is a problem for them. So thank you.
Yep. Everybody good with that? Okay, so we'll call the vote. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you. So that moves us to matters for information, and it's the Palace performance metrics, and it's Liam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this report is to give an update on performance metrics here at Palace. Starting with Ontario Works, there was a slight decrease in our caseload, moving from 164 to 162 cases, January to February, along with 86 applications received in the month of January. The average monthly income from paid employment fell to $880 in January from $966 in December, comparatively to the provincial average, which decreased from 902 to 898. And the number of clients reporting paid income in January decreased by less than 1%. Now moving on to children's services, the number of applications for fee subsidy received in January and February were 6 and 3 respectively. Comparatively to the same months in 2020, these values are lower. In the months of February, Palace served a total of 99 households, which was an increase from 94 houses, which were served in January. Similarly, the number of children registered within the fee subsidy increased from January to February from 162 children to 175 children. Within housing services, in the past 2 months, Palace has placed a total of 6 households in rent geared to income housing, with 5 in January and 1 in February. As well as there was 35 new housing applications received in the month of January and 25 in the month of February. In respect to the community by names list, there was 54 individuals as of December 2022. I'll be happy to answer any questions relating to these performance metrics.
Thank you, Liam. Is there any questions? Sam?
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, I'm a little confused with the some of the childcare metrics, saying that we keep hearing that there's such a need for childcare and affordable childcare, but I'm confused with why the numbers are so drastically down, and maybe that there's an explanation towards it. I mean, you were saying that other numbers were up, and like the ones needing affordable or fees subsidizing was down, or the applications are down for child services. So I just, why like 14 and 66%, it's quite substantial from year to year.
So this can be attributed to a bunch of reasons. One being the new implementation of this CWEL program, the cost reduction program. But since COVID, we did see a drastic decrease in just the fee subsidy caseload altogether. And there is requirements for applicants to put in like things like their income and tax receipts and other things like that. So there is still a high demand within childcare, but within fee subsidy, we did notice a drop in the amount of applicants that we were receiving once COVID hit. And it could just be for a wide array of reasons. There's no one particular answer as to why it did decrease like that.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Thanks. Just to follow up, do you think the more extensive applications have been creating a better system? Like, are we weaning out people that might have not needed the program but maybe abusing it, or is this creating barriers of accessibility for individuals who might feel like the more extensive applications are too intimidating or demanding, and thus we're losing?
It could be. I'm not really sure if it's really an extensive process per se. It is just what the ministry requires us to collect. Overall, I'm not sure it really creates an accessibility barrier, but just more of an accountability perspective to ensure that there is no abusing of the system of that. But
might be able to help out a little bit,
yeah,
too, Liam, just to jump in. Yeah, we have seen a bit of a reduction since COVID, as Liam mentioned. Some of it is because fees are being reduced, so perhaps some families now are no longer requiring subsidy because fees are becoming more affordable. In other cases, our fee subsidy system does put some barriers because it's based on their work schedule or their employment if they're going to school. So we may only be able to cover 3 days a week, for example, if that's their employment. But the center may be requiring 5 days a week. spaces. So because a lot of them are taking full-time children because of their own viability and trying to fill those spaces. So it could be a case of families who can't afford those extra 2 days because the subsidy is only able to cover 3. So as Leanne mentioned, we don't necessarily know exactly the reason, but there are a variety of factors that could be playing into that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? None? Can I have a mover and a seconder for this? Henry? Sam? All in favor? That carries. Thank you, Liam, and thank you, Pam. Moves us to adjournment. So can I have a motion to adjourn? Sam and John, all in favor? Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.